Hello there. Welcome to the Saraway channel, wherever you are in the world, and so much love to each and every one of you. How are you doing? I do hope you're doing remarkably well. I'm doing great, thank you very much. And don't forget to go and get yourself that lovely drink, because we're on part 2 of our story. And if you haven't heard part 1, click on the description, because you really don't want to miss out. And let's continue with part 2 of our story. Wilder was in his office when I bolted through the door with a frenzied enthusiasm. I was out of breath from running. I couldn't find the words I wanted so desperately to articulate. That's what happens when you're bowled over by something. You're lost for words. You can see them clearly in your head. You know what you want to say, but nothing comes out of your mouth, and you look like a blubbering idiot. Wilder looked at me with a bewildered expression on his face.
"Sit down, sweetheart. You look as if the wind has been knocked out of your sails,"
he said, ushering me into his office and beckoning for me to take a seat on one of his swivel chairs, while he told me to take long, deep breaths. I was practically gulping the air. Ruby, who was at my side, was wagging her tail, barking excitedly, as if she was trying to speak in my place.
"Whatever is the matter, Sandy? You're out of breath. Are you sure you're all right? Even Ruby here is behaving absurdly. What the heck is going on here?"
"Wilder, I don't know how to tell you this, but I've seen something so incredible. It was a lady," I finally managed to blurt out, with a great deal of difficulty. Wilder looked amused.
"All this excitement about a lady? Who is she?" he asked.
"I've got no idea," I told him frankly. "She was in the wood grove with her baby. She was very shy. She got a shock when she saw me and ran away."
"Too right she got a fright when she saw you. I don't care if she's got a baby, Sandy. What is she doing hanging around our wood grove? She's trespassing on private property, I'll have you know. I hope you told her she's not welcome here."
"No, you don't understand, Wilder," I tried to exclaim. "She wasn't like us. She wasn't like a local person you see around town. She was different."
"What do you mean she wasn't like us? You're talking in riddles, sweetheart."
"She was a wild woman. She was covered with hair like a bear. She was definitely human, though."
"Oh, I see where we're going with this. You must have seen a Bigfoot," said Wilder, looking nonplussed. "You say this was a female covered with hair. Did she have primate influences by any chance?"
"In a way, especially with the distinctive overlong arms and the pyramid-shaped head. Oh, she was beautiful, Wilder. Desperately shy. I'm so worried I'll never see her again. She was incredibly timid, but I could see she was clever. Her eyes, they were so kind. I tried to run after her, but she vanished. I liked her so much, Wilder. We connected. I know we did. There was a spark of familiarity between us when we locked eyes. It was so special. Nothing like that has ever happened to me before. It was a spiritual experience, it really was. Wilder, she was awesome, so intelligent. I got the profound sense she could look through me and knew all about me, like God does. I mean, who can do that?" Wilder got up from his chair and lovingly wrapped his arms around me.
"I hate to blow your bubble, Sandy, but I doubt you will see your Bigfoot friend again. You must have caught her off guard. Bigfoots by nature are very evasive, rather reticent. They can hide in plain sight, you know. You won't even know they're there. From what I've learnt, you will only see them if you catch them off guard, or if they choose to show themselves to you. Otherwise, forget it. You'll be chasing mirages. I mean, look at me, Sandy. I've never ever seen a Bigfoot in my entire life, and I've lived on this property since I was a baby. But my father saw one once on this very same property, I hasten to tell you. We never heard the end of it. Let's just say at every dinner party, once my father had indulged himself in a couple of alcoholic cocktails, out he would come with his Bigfoot story. My mother had to tirelessly remind him, "John, you told that story to Wallace last time he was here, don't you remember? And the time before that, and even the time after that." My father would chuckle, look bemused and say, "Nonsense, sweetheart. I don't think I've ever told Wallace my Bigfoot story before."
He could conveniently have a short memory when it suited him, as I think his Bigfoot story was his favourite story to share with people. I would sit at the table, my chin in my hands, my elbows on the table's surface, staring at my father in wondrous awe as he told his incredulous story. My father could hold an audience's attention any day of the week. Some people can bore you rigid when they jabber on, but not my father. Never my father. In truth, I don't think Wallace minded hearing the story again and again, and neither did I. I was absolutely fascinated. "Well, go on, Wilder. I'm dying to hear your father's story. You've never told me it before. Please tell me it. I'm so eager to hear it."
Well, my father was 18 years old at the time, a young man. His mother had asked his father to chop down 4 trees in the woodgrove that were past their prime. They were exceedingly old and were blocking the growth of some young, healthy trees. She wanted him to turn the old trees into firewood for winter. It would seem his father had taught him how to cut down a tree with a cross saw and an axe by making a large wedge in the wood. You had to judge the direction the tree would fall down, and my father, at 18 years old, decided he would try to take down the 4 trees on his own initiative, to show his own father what a competent young man he had become. In the past, he had only helped his father cut down trees, but never attempted the job on his own, and his father had warned him wisely that he should never take down a tree without supervision. But do you think for a moment that my father took any heed of his own father's sagacious warnings? Absolutely not. My father was carefree, mulishly stubborn, very opinionated, and at 18 years old thought he could do absolutely anything. Climb Mount Everest, attempt dangerous rapids, whitewater rafting, tackle venturesome high waves at the coast with his surfboard, conquer the entire world, so to speak. He had that kind of invincible, arrogant attitude one tends to acquire at that young age, when one is callow and incredibly naive. He foolishly thought he could turn his hand to absolutely anything. So I think it's safe to say he had a wee bit of an ego, and a slightly cocky attitude on him that needed taking down a peg or two. Ostensibly he admitted he fancied the idea of seeing his father's impressed look on his face, after he said, "Look, Dad, I cut down those 4 trees all on my own." He wanted his father to be wowed by his sensational achievements. Even at 18, he always sought his approval. I think his father was out all day that day. His mother was baking in the kitchen like she always did, and my father decided he would show off to his parents. This was his quintessential moment to shine. His parents would see just how tough he was, that he was built of strong stuff, and that nothing could ever intimidate him. He was a macho warrior of note. My grandfather began to hack at the first tree with his axe, and he said that he had this overwhelming sense that he was being watched. He glanced around the woodgrove curiously, but shrugged his shoulders, thinking, "What am I like? Nothing is there." And he continued to hack at the tree. But once again, the strong feeling that he was being watched would not go away, and it wrestled and rather teased his mind, making him feel ever so slightly keyed up and disquieted. But what can you do about something you cannot see with your naked eye? He had to ignore those anguished nudges that kept irking him, or he'd be unable to continue with his project. So he put those thoughts to one side and focused on the job at hand, even though the insomnious, alarming feeling that he was not alone stayed with him the entire time, like an unwelcome fly buzzing around his nose that he simply could not swat. My father was exceedingly triumphant when the smallest of the 4 trees came thundering down with a mighty crash, landing perfectly where he predicted it would come down. So his confidence grew exponentially. That was easy enough, he told himself, already envisaging his parents' shocked response when he told them he single-handedly had taken down 4 trees. 1 was down, there were 3 to go. By all accounts, the second tree was not so easy. My father was huffing and puffing as an exhaustive sweat poured down his face, which he mopped away. He said he thought he heard someone emulating his tired breaths. But when his furious breathing recovered and calmed down significantly, he cocked his ears to listen to the sounds of the woodgrove, but heard nothing. He told himself what he had heard was all but an echo of his own heavy breathing. The second tree was obstinately stubborn. It stood up haughtily in the ground with a proud repose, lofty and tall, and as my father hacked away at it, he realized things were far tougher than he'd envisaged, but he doggedly refused to be intimidated. This tree was going to come down, even if it took him all day, come hell or high water. After a long period of time, the willful, obdurate tree began to heave. It began to grumble, crack and snap, as if it was finally giving up the ghost. But it plummeted down to earth so swiftly, at a wrong, precarious angle, plunging directly into my father, without any apology. It would have bludgeoned him to death, I am in no doubt about that, rather like a squashed insect, if it had not been for the very fast, efficient interference of what my father would later describe as a giant-like human creature, who jumped in front of him, catching the tree in its powerful hands, as if it was as light as a feather. I hasten to say, not even a leaf or a lone twig scratched my father, as the powerful tree was lowered very gently to the earthen soil, so that when the tree finally touched base, you didn't even hear the ground react with even a judder or a shake. He said he was staring at a magnificent, very, very burly 8-foot-tall Bigfoot, covered in long, flowing, cinnamon-coloured hair. He said it looked at him through the kindest, very concerned, dark treacle-coloured eyes, and he heard words spoken to him eloquently in a strange indigenous language he did not understand, that was automatically translated into his head, telepathically in English. Makila ni qualisava na kashe kilena, ho makasati la tuo galasan. Don't you ever try that again. Next time you will be killed prematurely. The creature then turned around and glided away. My father said he walked with such an elegant gait for one so large. My father was naturally stunned by the incredible creature he'd encountered, but did not attempt very wisely to cut down the last 2 trees, that, like the other 2, had been marked with a red ribbon, so he had known what trees needed to be chopped down. I think the shock of having so nearly been killed, or seriously injured at the very least, had somehow extinguished, let's say, his cocksure bravado, making him realize he was not so invincible after all. He did, however, tell his father, "Oh, Dad, by the way, I thought I should mention, I took down 2 of the 4 trees in the woodgrove you were intending to cut down. I thought I would lend you a helping hand." Lo and behold, my father did not get the impressed reaction from his own father that he'd hoped to receive. On the contrary, his dad was irate. His father glared at him furiously and shouted, "How dare you, son, attempt to take those trees down without my supervision? What do you have? A death wish or something? You have no experience whatsoever to take trees down on your own accord. You are very lucky you did not kill yourself, son, because you so easily could have. You must have been very lucky. My father was certainly not going to tell his dad how close he came to losing his life. Some things he knew were best not shared. My father said his dad went to investigate what he'd done, discovering that all 4 of the trees marked with red ribbon were now down. Why did you lie to me, son? You did not bring down 2 trees. You brought down 4. But I didn't, Dad, he insisted. You did, son. And the last 2, well, I don't know what to say. You looked like you snapped the bloody things down with your hands. I don't know how you did it, son, but my God, it scared the bejesus out of me to see that you were so reckless in bringing those trees down. And a man like you, how you did it, God only knows. And I know one thing, you recklessly did not plan things properly. The last 2 trees definitely look snapped. My father was soon to realize that the last 2 trees had indeed been snapped, like his father had told him. He figured the Bigfoot must have realized that he was intending to take down 4 trees, based on the red ribbon markers. He knew my father was a liability, a danger unto himself, so he helped my father by taking the last 2 trees down for him, to save him the trouble. I hasten to say my father never ever saw that Bigfoot again, but it was definitely a male that he encountered. He described him as having very kind eyes and an incredibly human face, but he was gargantuan in size. I mean the way he lifted that tree trunk. There are no words to describe a strength like that.
Wow, that is quite some story, I admitted. 5.5 years later, it was a breathtakingly beautiful morning, and I felt quite excited about the day that lay ahead. It was the middle of spring, which was my favourite time of year, with autumn running behind as a second contender. I loved spring because everything was vibrantly fresh, the sunlight so gentle and effusive, warm but not hot. The colours of spring, the flowering foliage was always so pretty at this time of the year, and some of the flowering dogwoods were ablaze with blossom, while the oaks and maples were covered in fresh new leaves. I had been baking in the kitchen, making my favourite chocolate chip cookies, along with lots of homemade lemonade, because I was expecting a very important visitor, and I wanted to live up to being a phenomenal grandmother, even if I was only a step-grandmother, to my husband's grandson, little Oliver. Cherry, my husband's granddaughter, arrived as promptly as she had promised at our farmhouse, with her 6-year-old son Oliver. The little boy was going to stay with us for a week. She had taken a flight out to Portland from New York, and a taxi to our place. Cherry and her husband were going to London for a week. Her husband was going for business purposes, and Cherry was going to tag along and enjoy spending the day in London, shopping at Harrods and visiting the London Eye and some of London's esteemed art galleries and attractions. "I'm so grateful to the both of you for taking care of little Oliver here," she said, ruffling her hand affectionately through his brown hair. Oliver was a cute 5-year-old boy, with curly brown hair and wide, innocent brown eyes that made you intrinsically believe the little boy was an angel. But I hasten to say, nothing could be further from the truth. Appearances can be deceptive, and I was soon to discover that I was in for one hell of a rip-roaring time. Nothing had prepared me for the chaos that little Oliver was about to bring into our lives. I was to understand why Cherry looked permanently exhausted. "I need to warn you," she told us. "I know Oliver here looks so sweet, but don't be deceived. He is a handful. You're going to need to watch him carefully. He gets up to all kinds of mischief. That's an understatement, I'm afraid to say." "I'm excited," she told us. "I've been to London before, you know, when I was young. I have no memory of the place, really. I would have liked to have stayed there longer, but I don't want to be away from little Oliver for too long.
"Of course you don't," said Wilder, "but I assure you we will keep him occupied. I think he will thoroughly enjoy riding that old kiddie's bike we have stored in the garage for him."
I could see that Cherry looked worried for a moment. "Dad, just make sure that you don't leave any matches lying around, will you? It's just Oliver, well, he's got a fixation with fire. I caught him once playing with matches, and God forbid, if I hadn't been there, I dread to think what would have happened. I told him not to touch the matches, but sometimes with him, what I tell him goes through one ear and out of the other. It's like he has very selective hearing at times."
"He sounds a lot like you when you were young," said Wilder. "I remember you used to play with matches. You once nearly set light to the chicken coop. This fixation with fire must run in our family."
Cherry looked shocked. "But you never told me I did that, Dad."
"Oh, you were quite the mischievous one, you were. I can assure you of that."
"Was the chicken coop all right then?"
"Thankfully, yes. Your mother followed you out of doors. She had a sneaky suspicion you were up to something naughty. She said you would always wear this determined look on your little face, and she'd know at once you were up to no good. She removed the matches from your hand, gave you a little slap on your bum, and said, 'Don't you touch matches ever again. Do you understand, Cherry? It's incredibly dangerous.' Needless to say, you sat on the floor and howled like a baby."
"Oh, my God! I must have been such an obnoxious little brat," said Cherry. "It seems my son takes after me." "Don't you worry," I told Cherry. "I'll keep my eyes pinned on him all the time." "Well, he has got his dinosaur toys in the suitcase, his aeroplane launcher and some of his magnetic building toys to keep him busy. And then he loves Peppa Pig, Kippo and the Age of the Wonder Beasts, and Gravity Falls on television. He adores cartoons of any kind, so that will keep him busy." I could tell even when Cherry got into the taxi and waved us from the back seat of the car, that like any other mother, she was reluctant to leave her 6-year-old child in our charge for a whole week. And if he'd been playing with matches, this was a boy that needed to be watched. I tried to make sure that the sharp objects and matches were out of his reach, and I did my level best to keep him entertained. But I had forgotten from my own children just how taxing a 6-year-old child can be. And Oliver, on a scale of 1 to 10 for naughtiness, was easily a 10. Once Oliver's mother had left, he began to wail. "I want my mummy," he cried. "Oliver," I told him, "your mummy's gone away for a while, so you're staying here. But why don't we play with your magnetic toys? Make a car, perhaps. How about that?" I said obsequiously. "I want my mummy," he cried. I thought he'd howl forever, but thank God he soon settled down and forgot about wanting his mother, and began to show an interest in Sooty, my poor cat, who became the entire target of his fascination. The next thing I knew, he was chasing my unamused cat around the house, and then he grew bored when Sooty jumped up on a high ledge beyond Oliver's reach, and just growled at him with her tail twitching and her nose flaring. I didn't think Sooty took kindly to this young rambunctious intruder in our home, who had a penchant for pulling her tail. Oliver grew tired of pursuing Sooty, and thankfully began to play with his magnetic toys. One of the most infuriating moments for me was when I found him relieving himself on one of my pot plants in the living room. In truth, it gave me the shock of my life. Had the kid not been toilet trained yet? "Oliver, why don't you go to the toilet?" I told him. "You can't just pee on my indoor plants. You know where the cloakroom is. I'll take you there myself." "But your plant was thirsty," he insisted. Let's just say over the next few days, I was almost tearing my hair out with frustration over this annoying 6-year-old boy who seemed so hyperactive and bustling from one game to another like a jack-in-the-box. One morning I woke up early to find little Oliver nonchalantly sitting in the middle of the terracotta floor of the kitchen, eating a bowl of Kellogg's cornflakes, while the rest of the cornflakes were distributed ungainly all over the floor, along with a huge plastic bottle of milk flipped on its side. The milk was everywhere. It looked like a David Pollock painting. Sooty, my cat, was lapping up some of the milk Oliver had spilt. I think my cat had decided that this small ball of fiery energy had some redeeming qualities after all, the spilt milk being a very definite plus for my cat. Ruby was eating up the cornflakes, crunching them happily. It would seem that the three of them were having a whale of a time. The kitchen, on the other hand, looked like a war zone, and little Oliver was oblivious to the chaos he had caused. Little did I know, things were only going to get a whole lot worse. It was on Thursday evening when I tucked little Oliver in bed. I had bathed him, given him his evening meal of fish fingers and chips, and I was reading him his favourite book, called The Cat and the King. That's what I think it was, anyway. "Good night, sweetheart," I said, giving him a kiss. "I'll leave the night light on for you, but promise me you'll go to sleep like a good boy." "Good night, Granny Sandy," he said. I was relieved when he closed his eyes and literally fell asleep in front of me. He had been playing outdoors all morning in the sandpit and on the little tricycle. I'm quite sure he was worn out. I was secretly looking forward to Cherry returning. I was exhausted from looking after her son. Cherry checked in with us every day, and we reassured her that it was a piece of cake looking after little Oliver, when in reality it was as if a tsunami had invaded our home, with a plethora of unfortunate breakages. There was paint on the wall of our kitchen, where Oliver, having used acrylic paints, had painted a house, a sun, a few stick figures, Ruby the dog, and Sooty our cat. "Oliver, why didn't you paint your picture on the paper I gave you?" I chided. "You can't go painting on my walls like this." "'Cause the picture I wanted to draw was bigger than the paper," he explained to me. I was rather amused to see that he'd drawn Sooty our cat, bigger than Ruby, bigger than me, bigger than Wilder, and bigger than the sun. "Why did you make Sooty so big?" I asked Oliver, when I studied his picture closely, which was very good, I hasten to say, even if it was painted on my kitchen wall. "'Cause Sooty is the boss," said Oliver nonchalantly. Even at this young age, he'd picked up that my cat thought he ran the show and owned all of us. And judging by Oliver's picture, he even had charge over the sun. So my cat, in Oliver's eyes, was some kind of a demigod. That night I slipped into the sheets, melting into their folds like butter, with an exhaustion that consumed me. I barely even remember saying good night to Wilder. That's how tired I was. It was in the middle of the night that I woke up to a loud banging sound. Someone was banging our window, and to my astonishment a few pebbles went flying through our open window, landing on our bedroom floor, with a loud pinging sound. The curtains were half open. I looked at Wilder. He was fast asleep. Without his hearing aids in, he hadn't heard a single thing. What the hell was going on? And who was making such a loud commotion outside our bedroom window and wilfully throwing pebbles into our bedroom? I nervously ambled over to the window, peering out into the yard. I saw the Bigfoot I'd encountered in the woodgrove 5 years prior. I could see her very clearly under the light of the full moon, along with the motion-activated outdoor lights that were all on. She looked relieved when she saw me, as I leaned out of the window. She was waving her arms frantically. I looked down at her, and she said something like, "Oshakaka! Oshakaka! Oshakaka!" and pointed at the living room area with an urgency on her face. I heard the words in my head, "Fire! Fire!" I didn't even stop to put on a dressing gown or a pair of slippers, but hurriedly dashed down the staircase into the living room, and there was Oliver, sitting there in the middle of the floor, holding my husband's lighter in his hands and staring at the flames that were billowing out of the couch. I discovered he'd thrown pieces of chopped firewood onto the flames to make the fire all the more bigger. I can't describe how shocked I was. "What the hell are you doing, Oliver?" I screamed. "Stop that now!" I said, grabbing another piece of firewood that he had in his hands that he was about to throw onto the flames. We never pulled the living room curtains, so the Bigfoot had been able to see what Oliver was doing. She stood at the window pane, watching me in earnest. Thankfully, I always kept a fire extinguisher close to the fireplace, so I grabbed it and sprayed the flames. I was too shocked to get angry with Oliver, but I don't mind saying I was completely freaked out. The Bigfoot began tapping at the glass sliding door, which I quickly opened. She hurried into the room, inspecting the damage. She then picked up Oliver in her arms and spoke to him fiercely in her strange language that Oliver appeared to understand. He stared into her dark eyes and was nodding at her. Italafa, ho katachika, ho malatilaka, ho pasakalatwa, ho kilakilatakalako. She then put down the bemused boy. I've spoken to him. I don't think he will do it again, she said to me in her strange language. Apataka, kukulakatasi, ho foshanasikala, which for some reason I also understood. Thank you, I said. The Bigfoot nodded. Tila fuko asakatwa. I'm glad it's out, she said. Good to see you. And she suddenly looked very shy and turned around and glided away. I got down onto my hands and knees and took Oliver into my arms, giving him a big open cuddle. Why were you playing with fire and your grandfather's lighter? You know it's very dangerous, Oliver. You mustn't do things like that. To my amazement, Oliver said to me, I know. I saw the lady put pictures in my head of fire. It's bad, isn't it? I'm so sorry, Grandma Sandy. I won't ever do it again. I promised the lady I wouldn't do it again, and I always keep my promises. But why did you do it in the first place, Oliver? I was making a fire. I've seen Daddy doing it before when we go camping. I thought I could put the logs on the couch and make it nice and warm because it got very cold in my bedroom. I realized my grandson had put firewood on the couch and set it alight. Well, next time you get cold, you must tell me or you must tell your mother, but don't ever go making a fire again. Do you understand? Yes, Grandma Sandy. Good boy. I showed him the burnt piece of furniture. You see this, I said. This is what fire does. It damages and destroys everything. It could have burnt down this whole house, and then very bad things would happen to us. Do you understand that? Yes, Granny Sandy. I told you the lady showed me, with pictures in my head. Suffice to say, when I told Wilder the next morning what had happened, and how the female Bigfoot had thrown pebbles through the window to get our attention, he was gobsmacked that she had intervened, because our house could have gone down in flames, and unfortunately I confess that the 3 fire detectors in our home were so old they no longer worked. To cut a long story short, I have no idea what the Bigfoot told Oliver, but after her words of wisdom, whatever they were, not only did Oliver never play with fire again, but he became so much more aware of his environment and the consequence of his actions. Even Cherry told us when she returned from England, I can't believe the change in Oliver since he stayed with the both of you. He seems to be so much more clued up about things, and he's much better behaved. Looking back, I believe the transformation had nothing to do with me and Wilder, but the wise words of a sagacious Bigfoot. I still live in the red brick farmhouse with Wilder, and am getting significantly older these days, but we are still very happy together. I occasionally see the female Bigfoot on our property. She gives me a friendly nod when she sees me, but I think she's still painfully shy. But she certainly overcame her bashfulness when Oliver played with a lighter on that inauspicious night, when things could have gone badly awry. So there you are. That's my story. Wow, what an incredible story. Until next time, goodbye and good night.